Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is my review of the new Hellboy movie that just came out. I'm going to start with non-spoilers, and then I will tell you guys when I'm going to get to spoilers and let you guys stop if you haven't seen the movie and don't want it ruined. So, just for full disclosure, I saw the first two Hellboy movies when they came out years ago. I liked the original Hellboy. It was a good combination between the comic material and just more typical movie stuff that the director threw in there. It was just a satisfying movie, and while it wasn't as good as the comics, it did capture the feeling of those characters and some of the comic as well. The second movie, Hellboy 2, was terrible. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. I wanted to walk out of the theater. That one was a complete idea by Del Toro, nothing based on the comic, and I don't know why it was that bad. It was just a cheese fest. Hellboy was a unlikable drunk. It was just, there was a musical number in there. The makeup on young Hellboy looked terrible. It just, I don't know. I really, really wanted to walk out of that movie, and that's only like one of two movies I think I've ever seen I wanted to do that with. So this movie, the new one that came out, reboot, start from the beginning, is somewhere in between. It is nowhere near as bad as Hellboy 2, but is not as good as the Del Toro. It is closer to the source material. It is the closest you're ever going to see live action Hellboy. There are scenes directly adapted from the comics. However, everything other than those scenes isn't that great. It's not terrible. It's not like, oh my God, they shouldn't have made this, or I want to walk out of the theater like with Hellboy 2. But it's not that good either. So if you're a fan of the character, whether it's the comics or the old movies, I recommend just giving it a shot. Some people I'm seeing online really like it. Some people are like, oh, it's terrible. Though a lot of those people who are saying it's terrible are the folks who haven't seen it and are saying, like, Ron Perlman's the only Hellboy that could ever exist. It's like, how many Batman and Superman actors have we had? It's just a guy to fill a suit. He does an okay job. It's mainly just the story that fails him in this movie, because again, there are some parts taken from the comic, but the story that's original to the movie is most of it, and it cobbles everything together, and it's just not that strong. Now, it is a rated R movie, and yes, there is stronger language and stronger gore than in the previous movies. It's okay. It does get a little distracting. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the comic, has horror elements in it, but it's more about the scary types of myths and legends and folk tales that we used to tell ourselves, mixed in with like Lovecraftian monsters and stuff. It's not really about gore. It's not really about, the kind of modern horror type of violence and gore that you might get off of like Saw or something like that. So it's more about shadows and atmosphere and talking animals and creepy backgrounds and things like that, which you will probably never see captured in a movie, unfortunately. I mean, there's typically blood, there's oftentimes decapitations or impalings or something, but they're usually very sanitized when Mike Mignola does it. He's the creator of Hellboy. Now, there are other series that spin off from Hellboy, like BPRD, that is very in keeping with like modern horror tropes of, lots of gore and very violent in some of those story arcs. So, I mean, if you wanted to argue like, oh, well, it's not more violent than a BPRD comic, you're right. there are definitely BPRD storylines that put the new Hellboy movie to shame. But it is Hellboy and not BPRD. So it is, to me, a little disappointing because the Hellboy stories typically are written with everyone in mind. It's just a wide audience. Anyone can pick up and enjoy Hellboy. And putting it as a rated R movie means that the age that I was when I started reading Hellboy, I wouldn't have been able to watch this movie. So I think that's kind of a shame. And I understand that a lot of comics put out all ages comics and then have a rated R movie like Deadpool. But Deadpool is owned by, a giant mega corporation that's looking to exploit it to as many people as possible in a given medium. Hellboy is a very personal work, mainly done by one creator. And because it's that personal, it's personal to the readers as well. So I just wish that all of them could have enjoyed it, even though I know there's not that many, under 18 kids who would probably want to go see that movie, but it's just kind of a shame that they have to get their parents' permission, and their parents are probably like, what the hell's a Hellboy? Or look at the terrible marketing that for some reason is infatuated with the word hell and damn. I mean, this is one of the worst marketed movies I've ever seen. They just have no clue. But anyway, well, like I said, if you're interested in the subject material here, you like Hellboy from the comics or the movies or the animated movies or whatever, give this movie a try. You might like it. Like I said, to me, it's kind of okay. It's, somewhere between, good and terrible. It's just, in between. All right, so those are my non-spoiler thoughts. So please stop this video right now if you want to get into spoilers. Okay, so here we go. So first of all, there are a lot of scenes in there that come directly out of the comics, and again, they're done pretty well. Hellboy in Mexico, they changed Esteban's wrestler outfit, which, but other than that, it's a really well done scene. There is the Wild Hunt, and other than the lead hunter's deer head, which was really menacing in the comic, they change it here. Other than that, though, it is really well done. I mean, it was just so exciting seeing the Wild Hunt and the giants on the big screen. There is Hellboy's origin straight out of the comic, and up until the point where they stop it and they integrate Lobster Johnson and have him kill the Nazis, which is just perfect. Lobster Johnson's spot on great. That scene in, like, I don't know, every other Hellboy comic where someone is showing like what the world would be like if Hellboy became the beast of the apocalypse. Oh, you get that scene in there, and it is beautiful. It's probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. There's a fantastic scene. He's got the flaming crown and a flaming sword. Hell, horns out. He's riding the dragon, and it took me a minute to realize that he was like killing a bunch of humans, but I was still like, yeah, this is what I want to see. It was just so well done. I wish it was in a better movie. And there's a scene at the end where they're saving Abe Sapien, which is really cool. I like that reference. Kind of wish he was in the movie, but can't have everything sometimes. And then the post-credits scene is Kamachi the Deathless. We don't see him, but it is, kind of, I'm not sure if it's word for word, but if it's not, it's very close to the dialogue that Baba Yaga is saying to him in the comic. Is a cool tease, but there's not going to be a sequel, and they should have known not to count on one. And he should have been in this movie. There was really no reason for Kamachi the Deathless, and I apologize if I'm destroying this poor character's name. I probably am, but he should have been in here. He's basically a character in the trilogy that they were adapting, who is basically there just to give Hellboy some fight scenes while the plot goes through the motions to free Nimue. So he would have been perfect, but unfortunately teased for a sequel that will probably not happen. Now, what was bad about the movie was everything else. Or not necessarily terrible, but not great either. The old movie, trying to use superhero tropes and stuff like that. They threw in the love interest, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, it pretty much worked because they kept that working class feel for Hellboy. He just has this working class attitude. It's like, oh, there's another demon I gotta punch. All right, let me clock in. Boom, So this Hellboy, again, the script just fails him. I don't think there's anything wrong with the actor. It's basically Hellboy is a spoiled teenage brat who is angry at his daddy. And the whole thing is like this father-son relationship with like a lot of attitude to it. Like I said, he's written like an angry teenager, which is weird for a character who had been on the earth for like what 70 years, however long it's been since World War II. But for some reason, he's still got these daddy issues. And I don't really understand the infatuation of these movies with Professor Broom, who is his adoptive father in the comics, because in the comics, he's killed pretty early on in the first issue. I mean, he has had a little more to his story through flashbacks and stories set in the past, but like, I don't, like, for some reason, like, Hollywood just wants to go to like some very typical places to try to flesh out the character. They want to give him a love interest and a cat and a daddy and all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to see that. That's not why I read these comics. I don't want to see Hellboy's cat, his girlfriend, or his daddy. They are plot driven, and there is nothing in the world wrong with that. It's like watching a episode of Law and Order or a Monster of the Week episode of X-Files. These are very popular shows. These work. They are plot driven. I want to see, how the characters that he meets, what happens to them and how they interact with each other, and, what the monster is, and, what its story is, and all this stuff. I don't necessarily need to get into Hellboy's daddy issues or whatever. It's like, oh, I'm getting over this, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. And mind you, there are bits and pieces of character that are thrown in there, and they are very satisfying. I wish they'd just done, the way that they do in the comic books. I mean, Hellboy, yeah, he gets drunk sometimes in the comics, and because he's going through a lot of pain, and sometimes that's the way he deals with it. But it's not nowhere near as bad as it's shown in the movies, whether it's Hellboy 2 and the ridiculous terrible crap in that movie, or here where he's just an angsty angry guy. I mean, there's actually some really fun scenes where he's been drinking. There's a great scene in Hellboy the Island where he tends to drink with ghosts after he leaves BPRD. He'll be drinking, and then you'll pan away and you'll see that they're really skeletons he's talking to. And there's a villain who approaches him after he's been drinking, and he's like, "Back off, buddy. I've been drinking with skeletons." I really wish that was in the movie. But anyway. But yeah, I kind of wish that they would just go for more of the feel from the comic, because the comic does it so well. And we have seen comics that are very successful when adapted directly, like Sin City and Watchmen. I think the same would work here. I just absolutely, I mean, I would just love to see, again, Mike Mignola always does this thing where he pans to creepy stuff in the background, and he pans to some random animals who says some cryptic thing just out of nowhere. And it really creates this unique atmosphere for the Hellboy comics. It's just so cool. And I just wish, that they would have gone with that, because they like take word for word some scenes from the comic, but then they write all this stuff that just doesn't feel like the comic at all. And so, that's Hellboy and Broom. Oh, and by the way, Broom is kind of this like super macho, like I'm gonna kill demons type of guy, who's very abrasive, with Hellboy and stuff. And it's just a very different take on the character, and I just didn't like him all that much. So there is no BPRD as we know it in the comics. So we know BPRD as a bunch of superpower, or their main agents are superpowered. They're like Abe Sapiens, kind of a Loch Ness monster sort of guy, and characters like that are their main agents. None of that in here. This is like BPRD with like all human guys that gets wiped out, and at the end of the movie they hint that this is what BPRD becomes. And so the characters he meets with powers in here are just random people he just happens to be thrown in with during the story, and it's just not as effective. Alice, who is a major figure in the comics because she is the only time Mignola allows Hellboy to have a relationship, is a completely different character, as is Captain Damio. And I know there was controversy over his original casting, but it's not the same character. I am fine if they had cast him as a white guy, just like I'm fine that they cast Alice as a ethnic woman, because they're not the same character. And I wish they had not even used their names because they're very different. Alice, they do keep the thing about her getting kidnapped by the fairies, but that's where it ends. They give her the power of a medium, and she has the power of Johann, who is a ghost. Yeah, there I am. There I'm pointing at Johann. A ghost in a containment suit. But what they do is they give her his powers, which is basically seeing ghosts, talking to ghosts, and basically able to summon ghosts out of corpses to talk with them in a way that everyone can see. The way it's done in the movie is just really disgusting and was just really distracting. They could have done that. They could have done that better. And then Damio, as you can probably tell from the trailer, he's the Hulk who turns into a jaguar. He gets angry and he turns into the jaguar creature, who he's able to control enough that it can team up with Hellboy to fight a monster. This is a really, really far cry from the monster, this ungodly killing machine from BPRD, who is pure evil, kills every human in sight. Very different. And then Damio himself is also... I just didn't think it worked for me. There was just this soft-spoken, like British accent and dialogue for him, because they made him part of M11 in this movie instead of being an American, and it didn't really work for me. There were some parts of his abrasiveness from the comics. There's some parts of him in there, but it's just not enough for me. I just wish they'd made him into a different character. And the scarring was just like, he just looked like a dude who was scarred. He did not look like a dude who'd come back from the frickin' dead, which is the whole point of his character. I just wish they had made both him and Alice into different characters. I mean, I would have been totally down with like a commando who turns into a werewolf or another were-creature or something, because that's essentially all he was. He was just like a were-creature commando. That's who Damio was in this movie. And so for the villains, Nimue is just a very typical generic villain in here. She tries to say some of the lines from the comics, but for instance, there's that great speech from I believe it's The Wild Hunt, where she talks about the army that she wants. And it's a wonderful speech Mignola wrote. And unfortunately, between her accent and the music, I couldn't understand the dialogue. I know what she was saying because I've read the comic, but there were several scenes like that, with the sound mixing just kind of drowning out some of the dialogue. But the thing about it was, even knowing what she's saying, they kind of screwed the scene up, because, okay, monsters come to her, but then Hellboy shows up and they all run away scared. In the comic, Nimue basically has two functions. to gather an army of monsters to wipe men off the face of the planet. And it is a giant army that is pretty awe-inspiring in the comics. And second is to have a fight with Hellboy that ends in his death. Neither of these things happen. And instead, she is a witch who unleashes some kind of plague. The plague is shown as being bugs coming out of her, similar to the mummy. I'm not sure why that causes a plague. She's shown as like infecting people, just walking down the street in broad daylight and infecting people with her. With that, and a newscast is like, we don't know the source of the plague. Did you see the lady with the bugs flying out of her hands? Like, and it's just such a weird generic thing. I guess the plague must spread a different way, judging from what the newscast said, but I mean, it was just such a generic thing. And that's another thing, the broad daylight, walking down the street. This trilogy that they were adapting in the comics takes place in rural Europe. It's in the countryside, very isolated, and that's what makes it work. That's where those folktale monsters live. And so putting it in an urban setting, and I don't know if this was an influence from the previous movies, it just doesn't work as well. And that's why the movies that are live action just feel so watered down. They have to put them in the middle of a city. It just doesn't work as well. Oh, and by the way, Nimue tries to seduce Hellboy. She does basically the same pitch that the other villains in the comics did. She was kind of refreshing in the comics because she was the first villain that I recall that really was just like, okay, we're just going to kill him. He's not going to join us. I'm just like, I love you, Nimue. Because I was just so tired of that damn pitch that everyone gave him. It's like, please be the beast of the apocalypse. Please be the beast of the apocalypse. And it's like, he's not going to be. Just accept it and move on. And so I didn't think they did a great job with her. The pig creature. And I know he's got a name, but he's Pigman to me. He's been Pigman for like 20 or 30 years, however long it's been since I've read Hellboy the Corpse. I will say the fight with him was well done. I did enjoy that. And the effects on him were good too. I mean, I think they did a good job with him as far as visuals and that big final fight scene with him. The origin's a little weird because he's already a pig when he's in Alice's house when she's a child. He's already like a little fairy with a pig head. I think I would have to go back and watch the movie. I think that they said because he got burned by the iron, he took the form of a pig or something. I think that's what they were saying. I'd have to go back and look. Don't quote me on that. I think it just would have made more sense if they could have either just come up with a completely different origin for him or, have kept at least the part of the Hellboy the Corpse that gave the reason why this fairy was in a pig's body. Baba Yaga, she's okay. I think the problem with Baba Yaga is that she just felt kind of random in here. And in the comics, she's built up as she's basically the spirit of Russia. And so the reason she's in the comics is because Rasputin makes a deal with her. Rasputin is, of course, from Russia. And so she's tied in that way, and she keeps kind of coming back, because of those connections. And she's built up as kind of this unkillable thing. As long as Russia exists, the Baba Yaga shall exist. I didn't get any of that, and I just didn't feel like the fight scene was that great. Just didn't have that Magnolia feel to it. Getting in a martial arts fight, like hand-to-hand combat with Baba Yaga. I feel like they could have come up with something better and just, did the character a little better, and especially visually. Like, she was just disgusting for the sake of being disgusting. It was just taken too far, especially the eye, which is basically just a big gaping hole in the comics. It just, I mean, yeah, she should make your skin crawl, but not in a distracting way. And so I think that's pretty much most of your major characters in there. I mean, Esteban from Hellboy in Mexico makes an appearance, and it's pretty good. They tie it into the main plot. Oh yeah, and the main plot, by the way, I already mentioned daddy issues, but there's also a very brief and almost like abandoned part of the story where Hellboy starts questioning if he should be fighting monsters. Maybe they're, just bad because they're persecuted, and maybe he's killing innocent monsters or whatever. Now, this could have been an interesting thing, but it's only done for, I'm not sure how long it lasts, but not very long. Nimue tries to seduce him. He gets this idea in his head, then he meets Baba Yaga, and it's just like, screw it, they're all evil, let's kill them all. I don't know. It could have been an interesting thing. I think I like the way that they do it in the comic. And I think that's one of the, other than just the atmosphere and that blue collar attitude, and just, the essence of each of the characters is missing here. But in the comics, one of the interesting things, for instance, the scene where they kidnapped Alice, they took her as a baby. The reason why they do that in the comics is that the race of fairies is dying, and they're not reproducing anymore, and they need to kidnap human babies in order to keep going. And so he saves Alice in the comics, and that's a good thing, but it's also a sad thing because that means the fairies are going to, eventually be no more. And there's a lot of that in those stories. There's a lot of that, like, okay, they're unambiguously doing something evil to humans, but at the same time, there are consequences to Hellboy stopping them. And so there's this kind of heroism, but also with some sadness. We're seeing the passing of this old world with all these different creatures and monsters and spirits. And I really wish they had captured that in this movie. So I think that's kind of everything. I think I hope I've gone through everything as long as I've been rambling here. But regardless of what you think about the movie, I highly, highly recommend the comic. It is one of the finest bodies of work you will find in the comic book medium. It is a big body of work. And I'm going to be doing a video on how to read Hellboy, just kind of recommendations of, how to collect it and experience the stories. So like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, stay out of the Baba Yaga's chicken leg house.